Hello and welcome everyone to our program, The Stories of a People, a Language, a Place. My name is Alex Costas from the Bloomberg Connects team. Bloomberg Connects is a free app that provides access to digital guides to nearly 600 museums, libraries, parks, historic houses, festivals, gardens, and other cultural spaces around the world, including the Brooklyn Book Festival and the three organizations you'll be meeting today. You can use the app on site for an enhanced experience, or you can explore all these organizations from around the world in the comfort of your own home. First, I just want to say how absolutely thrilled we are to be supporting the Brooklyn Book Festival again for the third year in a row. It's a fantastic organization with great people and a great mission, and we're just so happy to be here again in 2024. I am really also excited to be moderating this discussion featuring three terrific and unique organizations. The McCracken Research Library in Cody, Wyoming, represented by Susan Fletcher, the household director of the library. The Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, represented by Shawn Iwaoka from the museum's collections team, and the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Mass, represented by Susan Bronson, the executive director. So we're going to hear more about each of these three institutions, their collections, how they maintain and celebrate them, and how they are each telling a unique story about history, culture, and heritage through their collections and through their work. We're going to start with some brief presentations from each organization just to kind of give you a sense of the lay of the land. We'll move into a nice conversation between the four of us, and at the end, we'll save time for Q&A. With Q&A, just add your comments into the chat bot at the bottom, and we'll take care of it at the end. So first up, I'm excited to introduce Susan Bronson, who's going to give you a brief walk through the history of the Yiddish Book Center. Let me share my screen here, and we'll be off to the races.
All right. Okay, we're going to bring that out a bit, I guess. There we go. So hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and to tell you a little bit more about the Yiddish Book Center and our work. It's much broader than our name might suggest. As noted here, our mission statement is recovering, preserving, teaching, and celebrating Yiddish literature and culture to advance a fuller understanding of Jewish history and identity, and we do that in a whole host of ways. But first, I'm going to step back a bit to tell you a little bit about how we got started. Alex, would you go? Yes, thank you. So we were founded 45 years ago by Aaron Lansky. This is Aaron 45 years ago or so. He was a grad student up at McGill in Montreal, and he and his colleagues at graduate school couldn't find any Yiddish books. They weren't, I mean, maybe one copy in the library of a book they were looking for. So they put up signs all around the city. Montreal had a big Yiddish-speaking population looking for Yiddish books, and the books just started pouring in. Aaron decided to take a leave of absence, and he kept collecting the Yiddish books. I mean, you can sort of see it got a little chaotic for a while there. Let's go to the next slide. Since that time, we've rescued more than 1.5 million Yiddish books from all over the world, from the United States, from South America, from Central America, from South Africa, from Australia, from Western and Eastern Europe, and from the Middle East. And the books keep coming in. These are just a few photos of our fellows and interns sorting through books as they came in. The one on the left of the girl kneeling on the floor, during the pandemic, we got more books than we had like in the prior decade. So they were spread out all over our performance hall, and took us weeks to go through them all. But it's quite exciting, and we have thousands and thousands of Yiddish books, all recovered from some from dumpsters, some from private homes, some from schools, libraries, places where they just didn't have a use for Yiddish books anymore. Next slide, please. So recovering all these books was just the beginning for us. We decided back in the 90s to digitize our books. And when we digitized the collection, we then have since made them all available online in our Steven Spielberg Digital Yiddish Library. So this is a comprehensive collection including all kinds of works: fiction, memoirs, poetry, plays, translations of other literatures into Yiddish. And so right now, more than 1,000 Yiddish titles are available to read online. And we also have developed Yiddish optical character recognition, which means the titles can also be searched by keyword. Next slide. But the books are just a piece of the story. So we know a lot of people don't read Yiddish. While the collection is of incalculable value to scholars and other Yiddish speakers and Yiddish readers, we wanted to open up this literature and culture to new generations and to people all over the world who don't speak Yiddish. So we have a beautiful building and a big visitor center, about a 50,000 square foot building. And we have a brand new permanent exhibition called Yiddish, A Global Culture, which highlights the reach, the creativity, and the expansiveness of Yiddish culture around the world. Next picture, please. So we've highlighted this not in a story, not in a chronological story, but by theme. We've got people on the right looking at Yizkor books. Those are memorial books of the Holocaust, towns destroyed in the Holocaust. On the left, you see what we've created is a recreation of the salon of a famous writer, I.L. Peretz, and the many artists that he worked with. The next slide. And we have a whole wall, a mural that we created called Yiddish Land, where we highlight various Yiddish histories all over the world, things that have taken place all around the world, just to give people a sense of the expansiveness of Yiddish literature. Most people don't know that Yiddish was a culture, a diasporic culture that was really in places all over the globe. And on top, I've highlighted just a few books in our collection that were showcased in the exhibit that also illustrate how expansive the literature is. You've got a book about workers' history, about proletarian. You've got a more recent translation of Harry Potter into Yiddish. You have a book of children's short stories, and you have a translation from Yiddish into English of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Next slide, please. In this section of the exhibit, we're showcasing the aftermath of World War II and the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. This is a very rare book that was recovered called The Last Days of the Warsaw Ghetto. And again, the literature ranges from history and poetry to all kinds of texts that showcase the history of the Jewish people that was lived in Yiddish. Next slide, please. So new generations are also creating in Yiddish, and one thing that we've begun collecting is a really fun phenomenon of new creations of Yiddish zines. Zines are homemade, independently published little magazines, little works. And this one is by a young woman who wrote about a famous Yiddish poet, Irina Klepfish. And this is just one example of many kinds of new creativity that's being generated in Yiddish. Many people think of Yiddish as a dead language, and it's simply not true. There is a whole new generation that's creating both writing in Yiddish, creating new music in Yiddish, and we are engaged and try to collect examples of all of that as well. Next slide, please. Also, just illustrating the global scope of Yiddish, these are stamps from books that were printed in Cairo, which at one point had a vibrant and very large Yiddish-speaking Jewish population. Next slide. We have our own publishing imprint, so we're not just rescuing old Yiddish books, we are again trying to bring them to new audiences. And we're doing that through our own imprint, White Goat Press. These are just a few examples of the many books we've published this year. The first is The Journey Through the Spanish Civil War. That's a memoir about the Spanish Civil War. There's a novel written by someone who was better known as a Yiddish poet, Celia Dropkin, Desires. And the last is a really important new memoir about the Warsaw Ghetto. I mean, it's not new, it's newly translated into Yiddish by Rochel Auerbach, called Warsaw Testament. It's a really important new book and just exemplifies the kind of works we're trying to bring to new audiences by translating them and publishing them in English. The next slide. So we've also collected oral histories. We've collected more than 1,400 1- to 2-hour oral histories from people around the world. These are in many languages, and they document the stories of many different people. You probably recognize this guy, Leonard Nimoy. We were fortunate enough to interview him before he passed away. He was a Yiddish speaker born and raised in Boston. And in this oral history, he tells the story of his childhood, and he speaks in Yiddish and sings in Yiddish, and it's really quite moving. It's just an example of the many, many stories that can be found on our website. Again, these are all searchable, and you can watch either hours of them or you can find them excerpted, because we've also tried to make it easier for people to enjoy pieces of them. That's okay, you can go on. So we've also published a new Yiddish language textbook because there really hadn't been a new modern Yiddish textbook published in many years. This is our textbook in Einem. It's now in use in colleges and universities all over the world. And it's really a terrific work that makes it easy for people today to learn Yiddish. And I just wanted to give a sense, again, that Yiddish is a youthful culture these days, and that we have a lot of young people coming to us to learn not only Yiddish, but to learn about Jewish literature and Yiddish culture. Next slide, please. And overall, our website is really deep in content. So while we love people to come to us and see our exhibition, and see our collections in person, you can access so much of it online. I already mentioned the digital library, the oral histories. We have archival recordings, and we have a regular series of virtual public programs. You can access all of those online. You can access many, many Yiddish short stories and poems and other things in translation on our website. And it's really sort of a place you can go and do a deep dive and do research and explore right there. So you can come to us, or you can just explore who we are online. So next slide. So that's it. I could say so much more, but I'd love to hear from you. So please reach out to me at sbronson@yiddishbookcenter.org, or go to our website, yiddishbookcenter.org, and just learn more about us there. And I look forward to talking with all of you in the next hour. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. And now off to Cody, Wyoming, Susan Fletcher at the McCracken.
Great. All right. Well, I'm excited to share about the McCracken Research Library. Our library is part of the Buffalo Bills Center of the West out here in Cody. The Center of the West is a big museum complex with 5 museums plus 1 research library. We have the Buffalo Bill Museum, the Draper Natural History Museum, the Cody Firearms Museum, the Plains Indians Museum, the Whitney Western Art Museum, and of course our library. I thought I would just share a little bit about Cody. I have been in my position for about a year, and I didn't know anything about Cody before I moved here. So I thought people in Brooklyn and Los Angeles and all over might like to know where we are. So we're all the way in the northwest corner of Wyoming, where the little heart is. We are an hour east of Yellowstone National Park, which you can enter through the east gate to Yellowstone. And so our rural location, really informs our collections and informs the work that we do. Here's a picture of the Shoshone River, which is about a mile down the hill from the museum. So you can see that we're located in a really beautiful part of the world. This is a picture of our reading room, which is where I'm coming to you from today. We had a group of teachers doing an Indian Education for All workshop a few months ago. And so they are looking at resources on Indigenous history written by Indigenous scholars. So the mission of the McCracken Research Library is that we collect and preserve original manuscripts, books, publications, photographs, imagery, and media in support of the Center of the West research mission. So our collections consist primarily of primary and secondary resources related to the Northern Plains and Rocky Mountains from the 19th century to the present. Our areas of concentration include European American exploration, migration and settlement, the life and times of William Cody and his Wild West shows, Western art and artists, Indigenous peoples and cultures, the history of firearms technology and use, and natural science, and the history and prehistory of Yellowstone National Park and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The library is comprised of several different components. We have around 600 archival collections. We have about 36,000 books. We have around 1 million images, and we also have an extensive collection of oral histories and moving images as well. So one of our most heavily requested archival collections is the W.F. Cody, the William F. Cody collection. And here he is, the man himself. Cody was arguably the most famous man in the world during his lifetime, and he spread the myth of the American West all across the world through his traveling Wild West shows and their expeditions through the United States and Europe. He was not the only Wild West show around. There were several other performances, but he's the one that we remember most. So here's Cody. And this is one of my favorite images in the collection. This is a horse football, which was an act during one of the Wild West shows. You can see the riders and the horses playing football there. Because we're at the part of the Brooklyn Book Festival, I decided to pull out one of our New York related materials. So this is a letter from Major General Wesley Merritt to Buffalo Bill. Cody had gifted him a box seat for the opening performance of the Wild West show at Madison Square Garden in 1897. And then this is one of Cody's scrapbooks that he kept during their season in Brooklyn in 1894. So this is filled with newspaper clippings and all sorts of other memorabilia from that season. As I mentioned, we support the history and prehistory of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So this is a historic image of Old Faithful Geyser. And then here are some postcards from scenes of Yellowstone. So we have the Great Falls and Old Faithful and some other iconic Yellowstone scenes. So Cody is located about 20 minutes to the south of the historic location of the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. The Heart Mountain Relocation Center, which is located between Cody and Powell, was one of 10 relocation camps built to house people of Japanese descent forcibly relocated from the west coast of the US during World War II. And so if you visit the region, you can visit the Heart Mountain Interpretive Center. They have a wonderful interpretive center there where some of the barracks from the relocation center are still standing, and they do an excellent job interpreting the history of this time. In our collection, we have some images from Heart Mountain, including this one. A local photographer named Jack Richard used to visit the camp and take pictures of the residents there. So here we have some ladies on a cold winter day, and Heart Mountain is in the background. As I mentioned, we also have an extensive collection of rare books. And if you were to come visit us in our reading room, the Lewis and Clark journals would probably be one of the first things that you would see. These are the originally published versions of the Lewis and Clark journals that were published in 1814. And the original manuscripts are in Philadelphia, but we have some of the originally published versions. And then we also have, this is from John James Audubon's Quadrupeds of North America. And here we have his rendition of muskrats. And I like this image because I can't quite tell if these are adorable muskrats or kind of terrifying muskrats. I think these are up for your interpretation. So because the McCracken Research Library is located in a fairly remote corner of the world, we engage with scholars through both in-person research and remote access. The McCracken Library also consists of modern scholarship of the West as well. So if you're looking for top, books related to the American West, you can jump on our online catalog. It's one of the areas that we're collecting in heavily right now are books on Indigenous history written by Indigenous scholars. We also have a pretty robust content DM platform. So if you're interested in looking at photos of Buffalo Bill, Annie Oakley, all kinds of Western scenes, you can jump on our content DM website and then contact us for possible research and rights and reproductions. And so here is our staff. We certainly invite you to visit us. Just so you guys know, the East Gate to Yellowstone is closed from November to the 1st of May. So we get a lot of visitors, most of whom come out and visit us in the summertime, although the library and the museum are also open year round. So if you guys come visit us, we certainly encourage you to think about coming in the summer when travel might be a little bit easier in Wyoming, and you can contact us for more questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. I vote for those being adorable muskrats, personally. And over to Shawn to talk about Japanese American National Museum.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm the Assistant Collections Manager at the Japanese American National Museum, and I'd like to introduce you to JANM's collection and tell you a little bit about how we care for the collection and how it continues to grow. So JANM was incorporated in 1985 as a nonprofit, and shortly after that, in 1986, we began collecting artifacts. The museum opened a few years later in 1992 at the just right outside of where I am in a historic Buddhist temple called Nishi Honganji. And in 1999, the museum built the JANM Pavilion where I'm right now, and that is where all or the majority of JANM's collection is stored. So it is 2 levels, and I'm on the first floor, and there's a mirrored version upstairs. So the founders, when they created JANM, really felt that they wanted to tell a part of American history that didn't seem to be widely available in most mainstream American museums. And that was the story of the Japanese American experience. And they began to do that by collecting oral histories and they found that those oral histories and those stories really needed to be anchored by objects. And so they began collecting. And the object that you see right here on the screen is part of the first donation to the museum, and it was photography equipment by a Japanese-American photographer named Toyo Miyatake. So this is collection number 86.1, and that was the first object that came in. So JANM's collection is very broad in scope. It is broad chronologically and geographically, but the collection's parameters of the museum, the collecting scope, goes from immigration of Japanese Americans all the way to present. And the heart of the strength of JANM's collection is really the World War II experience. But you can see all the different types of objects that we collect, but we have artifacts, artworks, photographs, historical documents, textiles, ephemera, film, and oral histories. So I'm going to show you a quick video, and it'll give you a sense of JANM's space and the collection. So I think like a lot of museums, who went through the pandemic, we made a lot of videos. So you could see that was me, and we're all masked up. So some of the items I thought I'd just throw out are, some hidden gems in the museum's collection. Like I said, the strength of the Janum's collection is the World War II experience, and one of my favorite items is in the top left corner. It's Citizen USA. And this was possibly a children's book that was created by the director of adult education at one of the incarceration sites here in California at Manzanar. And it's the story of a fictional character, this young girl pictured here named Jane Sato. Um, and we had this book, and it just tells her life, daily life of what life was like in camp, and it just uses this name Jane Sato over and over again. And so it was donated by the widow of Charles Ferguson, the director, and it sat in collections for a long time with very little information. And when I came in, the archivist and I kind of took up this collection and began researching and trying to figure out who Jane Sato was. And eventually, this young girl who was about 7 or 8 when she was in camp was still alive, and in 2019 we made contact with her, and it was really great to like actually speak with her and find about her, find out about her life and what she's been doing in the intervening years. So I think that's kind of the exciting part about the collection. It's very vast, and we have a very small staff, and so there are some collections that still really require a lot of research. But I guess for time considerations, I won't go into all of them, but you can kind of see another Star Trek reference here. This is George Takei's Sulu uniform, and just right to the right of it, this document is really amazing. It's a labor contract for Japanese who went to Hawaii to be plantation workers, and it gets into just how many days, 26 days out of the month that they had to work. It gets into wage disparities between men and women, and accountant like lists off that $2.50 a month was being set aside for their return passage to Japan. So just a really amazing objects in the collection. So about what we actually do on a daily basis. So I think a lot of institutions, collections department is focused on preservation and maintenance of the collection. So you can see myself and one of the interns that we've had, we're putting a Cory basket, which is one of the pieces of luggage that were carried by immigrants 120, 130, 40 years ago. We're putting in an archival box. We also do in-house digitization. We're very fortunate to have a photo studio, and you can see that there's a kendo mask that's being photographed there. We also do preventative care. We try to dust as much as possible. And, I think like a lot of institutions, we have to consider pest management. And so you can see on the left side, myself and the archivist, where she's got a big vacuum cleaner on and I'm dusting. And then we work closely with the exhibitions team. And this is one of the barracks actually from Heart Mountain in Wyoming. And one of the windows needed repair. And so you could see exhibition staff member John Janai, he's deinstalling and creating a customized mount for that window. So like I said, we have a very small staff and we don't have in-house conservators. So, but we reach out to specialized conservators, and this is a general objects conservator. This is a Boy Scout drum that was part of a Boy Scout troop from the 20s and 30s, and it had a tear in it. And you can see on the left-hand side, this tear opened up, and the conservator removed the drum head and repaired it. And like all conservation, right, the work is reversible, but you can see that the repair is done on the right. So Janum is a very active collecting museum, and the other, I think, most common thing that I do on a daily basis is answer emails and phone calls. We get, because we have a public space, visitors will just come in and drop off items, and sometimes we'll do family visits. You can see on the left-hand side, we went and we picked up a trunk. We then also went out to a home. The bottom center photograph is a Japanese American who had created all of these wood art, wood pieces, wood reliefs in camp and throughout his life. So we had to go kind of figure out which ones we wanted to take and bring them back. And also families that will come in and they'll bring their items in, and we have an opportunity to sit down and speak with them and get their family story and make sure that that story is being attached to that object. So finally, how can you access JANM's collection? The websites, we have janm.org, which is kind of the main portal, and it'll have information about donating. It'll have some featured collections. We also have janm.emuseum.com, and that's where all of the digitization, the digitized collections go up. And finally, if you're a researcher, if you're just a student doing a project, or if you're a family who's donated items, we set up aside a research space in our library for visitors to come in and actually view and handle the objects in person. So yeah, that's my presentation. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Shawn, Susan, and Susan. I think it was just great to be able to kind of take a peek into your day-to-day, what your collections look like, what the facilities are, the amazing origin stories. I want to pick up, first of all, as I've told all three of these folks in our conversations, we have about 7 million hours of great conversation to have. We're going to try to get it into like 15, 20 minutes of Q&A. So hopefully this inspires you to learn more about these organizations online or hopefully in person at some point in your lives. Just picking up on where Shawn left off, Susan, you know, the idea that collections are ever evolving and are changing. How are you finding, you know, people bringing, you mentioned Susan Bronson, the zines. How are you seeing your kind of collections evolve, and where are people, or how are people bringing new things to you? And are there any interesting stories of someone who came with a box of something or sent you a package with miscellaneous objects to keep evolving your collection?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, people send us things. I mean, we get both calls from big institutions that want to send us thousands of books and people that just bring us a box from their mother's house or something like that. And we sort of take everything and then, you know, we sort through it. I think, you know, one of the favorite things that happens, that I find that happens, is sort of the kind of the ephemera that comes in that is unexpected. For example, we find notes in books, we find inscriptions in books. We found a recipe card in a book from a family, and one of our fellows cooked the recipe and then wrote about it and then found the family that the recipe came from. So the books are important as objects in and of themselves, but the readers and the stories behind them are also so fascinating. So I think that's one of the really fun parts of the collecting for us, which is not an active collecting. We just receive. People just send things to us, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, kind of on along the lines of what Susan was saying, we have our materials come to us through all kinds of avenues. We most recently had a collector. Well, I think this was a man who had a long circuit photo of Buffalo Bill and his performers in his collection. I think it had been passed down through his family. So he reached out to the library to ask us if we were interested in that. So all of our potential collections go through a collections committee that all 5 of our museum curators and I sit on, and we kind of collectively decide what fits our mission and what doesn't. So yeah, all kinds of areas. We also have collectors who, you know, have Yellowstone material, or you know, we have personal researchers who give us their papers. So yeah, all kinds of pathways.
Now, are there, as you are collecting and kind of growing your collection, Susan, Fletcher, you mentioned kind of if it fits the mission, you have a review committee, but are there certain areas, like are there, you know, thinking in terms of like memorabilia, comic book, card collection, there's like a holy grail to a collection, that one card, that one object. Are there things that you're kind of actively looking to grow and expand in, or areas maybe where, like, you know what, if we had a little bit more depth in the subject matter or for this geography, are those things that kind of, as you're talking to collectors or receiving things, considering as stuff comes in?
Yeah, for sure. So we're at a stage in our library growth where we're considering developing new audiences and new areas of collections. One area in particular that we're hoping to strengthen ourselves in is the scientific history of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We have a good collection of those things already, but are certainly excited about growing as well. And I personally would love for us to expand into perhaps like religious movements of the West. There's a lot of those movements happening out here as well. So yeah, lots of areas for potential future growth for us.
Susan, Shawn, any areas in your world where you're thinking to maybe deepen the collection, or if you could bring more things in tied to a certain moment in time or type of object?
I guess I'll jump in and say that, you know, when the museum was founded, right, there was this focus on collecting items from the first generation of immigrants, the Issei, because, you know, just time-wise, you know, they were getting older and some were passing away. And there was this concern that these items would be lost. I mean, a lot of the Issei had, you know, gone through incarceration and had, you know, forcibly had to leave, you know, property and their home and all the items in it. So the items that had been saved were so critical to telling that pre-World War II story. But as time has gone on, right, you know, as people age, right, the second generation, the Nisei have aged, and now, you know, it's critical that we collect them and so on. So I think like any institution that's focused on, you know, history that's all the way up to, you know, the present, it's kind of figuring out what is history or what will be history tomorrow. And I think so I think we're kind of coming into, you know, the 70s and the 80s, the Asian American movement, the protests that came out of the 70s, and the reparations and redress movement for Japanese Americans. I think that's a focus now because you know, the key individuals, you know, they're holding onto their items, and they're I think it's figuring out how to tell their story properly and how to collect their items.
Susan, you're on mute. Sorry. And I was on mute
I was
too.
saying that there's a similar trajectory in the sense that a lot of books came to us. We wouldn't exist were it not for the Holocaust, really, because, you know, these books were only being thrown away and left behind because of that great cataclysm. And, you know, I would say, for instance, in oral histories, we desperately wanted to interview native Yiddish speakers, you know, from Eastern Europe who fled Eastern Europe, who are quite elderly. But what we're also trying to do now is interview young people who are coming to Yiddish and learning Yiddish and studying the culture and trying to understand what does that mean and where does it come from. So in some ways there's a similarity there in terms of making sure we're preserving these older stories, but also, you know, with the zines and with the new creative work, we want to make sure we're representing that as well in our institution.
Keeping on the theme of evolution, you know, I think Shawn and Susan Fletcher mentioned kind of the most commonly searched items, the objects that people kind of go back to and ask about most frequently. Has that changed over time? So have you seen over the years people start to ask for different subject matter? Like Google has their annual top 100 search terms. Like if Google did a search term for Janum, would you see over the years people looking in or maybe digging a little bit into parts of your collection they may otherwise not have 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, like I mentioned, the strength of the collection is this World War II incarceration. And but I think at least, I guess from my perspective, there's been this real interest from, you know, professors down to art curators to focus on the Issei, the first generation, and not just the you know, I guess the broader understanding of the Issei. I think there's this narrative of Japanese Americans who came to work, to be laborers, which I think was the vast majority. But I think there's this kind of focus on Japanese or Japanese who came to the U.S. to study art and would travel back and forth. And so this real like trans-border kind of relationship that existed between Japan and the Japanese who were here and their time in America. So that's been, I think, a real emerging area of interest in the last couple decades.
For us, there are many, but I think, there's been a real attention to Yiddish women writers in the last decade. Women, not surprisingly, didn't get their due during their day, and all of the books that were known to everyone that were the great Yiddish writers was people like Sholem Aleichem and Isaac Bashevis Singer and Chaim Grada. And what's happened now is a younger generation are uncovering all of these books that were written by women that the scholars and the great scholars in the field really weren't even aware of. So that's been a really exciting development and something we're seeing a lot of.
Yeah, I think for us, the people pretty consistently search for Buffalo Bill, Annie Oakley, Wild West performers. I think, where things change is kind of what's going on in the scholarly world. And how we're looking at those things. So right now we have a cohort of German scholars who are interested in studying like the German perspective of the Wild West show. So I think that's quite interesting. So, for us, like pretty consistent topics, but, depending on what's going on in academia, people are re-examining the West and looking at things differently.
I think you mentioned, Susan Fletcher, the idea of myths, and people have a very specific view of what the West is, and Susan Bronson, like what Yiddish represents, and that it's a bygone era. And are there kind of other myths or kind of challenges, or how do you work through to kind of maybe change people's perspectives on what the Yiddish language is, or what the Japanese American experience is, or what the West is? Is that kind of inherent to your day to day?
Yeah, I mean, for us, since we are, I think, in a way, my role is a little different from Susan and from the others in the panel, because I oversee the whole institution, and we are an educational institution as well as a library and to some extent an archive. And so much of our work is about trying to open up this whole universe and all of the content that it represents. So a lot of my day-to-day is thinking about how to do that, how to reach new audiences through educational programs, through public programs, through cultural programs, through exhibitions. And so, it's really about opening up the collection. So yeah, it's something we think about all the time, and it's one of the most exciting part of my work, certainly.
Yeah, I think for us, just in terms of like broadening and complicating the story of the American West is kind of our mission here. I think a lot of people, when they think of the American West, especially if they don't live in the West, they think of, the movies and the romance of the West. And, the American West is a very complicated, contested place full of sites of tragedy and hardship, and like the West. There are so many different like scholarly components to that, not just history, but also science, art history, the history of the Plains Indians people, cultural history. So there's just a lot that goes into re-examining what is the West and what does it mean to be a modern Westerner as well.
And just jumping in here, a question from the audience, I think, is relevant to this topic. So I think each of you have worked at organizations that have a specific focus in terms of culture or history or heritage. How do you kind of work to go beyond who you may think is your Japanese Americans? Maybe you'd assume would be the folks who may be attending the museum, or Yiddish speakers or people of that background or heritage. How do you expand beyond and make sure that the history and what you're talking about is not just for a certain group, but for everybody?
Well, I'll jump right in. We have a public library program that we launched a couple of years ago to work with public libraries all over the country to organize reading groups of Yiddish literature, but around themes that have a common thread. The most recent one was called Stories of Exile. So the Yiddish books were related to that theme, and we asked the libraries to pick books from their communities that related to the same theme, and it's a way in to reading the literature, but in conversation with other cultures and other communities. So that's just one way, that's just one example of how we're trying to reach beyond our sort of core audience.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the challenges I have as the relatively new director of the McCracken is making the story of the American West relevant to other geographical regions. So one thing in particular that I've been learning about is, you know, some of these Eastern artists who came west to do all these great iconic paintings that we've seen, you know, who didn't actually live here. They visited and then they went back and then they painted, you know, in the East and participated in the art market out East. So, you know, I'm trying to think of ways to, you know, to make the story of the West relevant to people in, you know, major urban centers.
You know, I think for me in my position, working in collections, you know, I think we're focused on the objects, and so it's what people bring in. But I think, I guess, you know, looking out at other departments, I think and thinking about the history of the exhibitions at JANM, I think that has always been, you know, a concern and part of its mission. You know, one of the early exhibitions that JANM did was looking at place. Just east of here is an area called Boyle Heights, and it was a community affected by redlining and racial covenants. And so it was a place where Japanese Americans, Jewish Americans, Mexican Americans, African Americans were all kind of, you know, not forced, but were allowed to live, and so, you know, putting together an exhibit that was about a place and that had this broad connection to different cultures and groups of Americans, and using, you know, those kinds of themes to help tell the story and share the story of Japanese Americans, and kind of find connections to I think a lot of experiences that Americans go through.
Amazing. So I think we're at the nearing the end here. So this is the one question, caveat. I've already spoken to everyone about this question. They all said we would never be gifted anything from our collections. These are for the people, for the collections. But the question is, if each of you could have one item maybe on loan for your house that you could walk into your living room every day and see this one object from the collection, what would that be? What would be that one thing that you just get so much interest and joy from seeing every day at the office you'd love to have on your mantle for a little while?
All right, well, there's an extraordinary book that modernist art that was created by several women in Poland before the Holocaust, and there were very, very few copies that were ever made. It's just gorgeous. It's very, very rare, and it tells a very poignant story that these women, you know, they were likely killed, and the book is barely known, and it's just spectacular. So I guess I would point to that.
I guess for me, there's a pretty iconic photo of Buffalo Bill and some of his Wild West performers that are they're all lined up on the seashore under the Cliff House Hotel, and it's an interesting photo because the photographer did some creative editing. Circuit photos, you take, you know, you have a special camera that pans, but he also did some creative editing, and you know, would take a picture and then would kind of move people around and put them, you know, maybe in the middle, and then put the same people on the end. So I just think that's an interesting photograph from an early, you know, like an early photography technology standpoint, and, you know, kind of speaks to, like, we can have photographic evidence of things, but that doesn't always mean that the photographer wasn't doing some tricks in the background to make that photograph happen.
Well, I'm very fortunate that I live about a block and a half away from the museum. So this is kind of like, in my mind, an extension of my own space. But I think before I moved closer, Janum has such a great art collection. And some of the pieces that you saw in the video, but one artist in particular, Hideo Date, I think it would be just amazing to have, your, original artwork hanging up in your home, and you could just rotate it out. I mean, such a incredible collection. But yeah, I think maybe the artwork.
And with that, I just want to thank Susan Fletcher, Susan Bronson, Shawn Iwaoka for taking the time on a Sunday to give people an insight into their amazing work. Again, you can learn all about them on their websites or on the Bloomberg Connects app, or visit them in Amherst, in Cody, and in Los Angeles. Have a fantastic afternoon, and thank you all so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.